TV studio.
It's not very
That's okay, that's okay. That's okay. We've got small legs. No problem.
So everything is set. You don't have to worry about it.
Okay, okay.
Microphone is already working.
Okay.
And we'll operate everything from the other main.
Wow.
You're okay.
Amazing, amazing. Can I move it back a little bit? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Just so, okay. Good. Excellent. Right. Okay. What a beautiful pavilion.
Yeah.
All right. Do we need this? Okay.
Okay. Hello. Hi. Hi. Nice to meet you. My name is Choudhury.
I'm Bernadette.
Good afternoon, everyone. Since it is past 4 p.m. here in Glasgow, we'll now begin our event. My name is Yoo Jung Kim. I am the Senior Development Management Expert at the United Nations Office for Sustainable Development, UNOSD. Welcome to the side event in Korea Pavilion at COP26 in Glasgow, hosted by UNOSD of the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA. Please note that this event is being recorded and live streaming on YouTube through the Korea Pavilion channel. With the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration and the COP26 of UNFCCC as the backdrop, this event is centered on the theme of green deals to accelerate ecosystem restoration, climate action, and sustainable development goals implementation. Joining us today is our roster of distinguished speakers and experts who will be sharing their knowledge, insights, experiences regarding how green deals can be used as a means to stop the climate change, save the planet and the people. To formally start this event, I would like to welcome to the podium Mr. Chun-Gyu Park, Head of Office at the UNOSD, for the opening remarks. Let us all give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Ms. Kim. It's a wonderful introduction. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome you all to this side event titled Green Deals to Accelerate Ecosystem Restoration, Climate Actions, and Sustainable Development Goals Implementation. First of all, I would like to express my most sincere appreciation to the Government of the Republic of Korea for organizing the Korea Pavilion of this event of COP26. UNOSD is deeply honored to host the side events as a part of Korea Pavilion activities. Along with today's session on green deals, UNOSD will host another side event on greenhouse gas inventory system on next Tuesday, November 9th. I kindly ask for your participation and continued support for next events, both online and on-site. My special thanks goes to Her Excellency Professor Yoon Soon-jin, the chair of the 2050 Carbon Neutrality Commission of Korea, for her presence and delivery welcoming remarks. I also would like to extend my gratitude to all the speakers, panelists, audience, taking time out of their busy schedule and attending this event. I'm sure your insightful remarks and presentations would enrich our event. As we all agree, climate change manifests itself in many ways. Record floods, raging storms, deadly heat waves across the globe are all the striking signs of the relentless pace and impact of climate change. The Earth is a complex system composed of a wide variety of subsystems. It is obvious that rapid changes in the climate system brings negative impacts on the ecosystem. Climate change knows no borders or species. It affects every form of life on Earth. Climate change is impacting ecosystems coupled with other associated changes such as increased ocean acidification as well as the artificial pressures including degradation, deforestation, and fragmentation. Ecosystems feature prominently across many of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and targets. They contribute to direct human well-being and development priorities. Biodiversity is at the center of many economic activities, particularly those related to crop and livestock, agriculture, forestry, and fisheries. Globally, nearly half of the human population is directly dependent on natural resources for its livelihood, and many of the most vulnerable people depend directly on ecosystems to fulfill their daily subsistence needs. Ecosystems are not just victims of climate change. They can also assist in the mitigation of adaptation to climate change. Restoration of degraded land is essential for keeping global climate promises. According to UNEP, actions that prevent, hold, reverse degradation can deliver on 1/3 of the mitigation that is needed by 2030 to keep global temperatures below 2 degrees Celsius. Ecosystem supports all life on Earth, including people. Protection and revival ecosystem can help not only to combat climate change, but also to end poverty and prevent the collapse of biodiversity. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development has already passed 6 years of its 15 years of implementation. Recently, we have witnessed many progress regardless of difficulties and challenges that we face, like pandemics. As a response to climate emergency, while considering sustainable recovery from the pandemic, countries across the globe have announced and implemented Green Deals. Green Deals is a package of legal, economic, and policy measures that aims to address climate change, environmental crisis, and social inequality while pursuing economic growth and job creation. It is based on the fundamental premise that a comprehensive approach to both environment and economy are essential to find a way to resolve these issues. Specifically, investment in ecosystem restoration has often been included as a key component of these Green Deals. Many countries around the world, including the Republic of Korea, the European Union, and Pakistan, have taken the leading role in introducing their Green Deals to combat climate change and to enable smooth transition into a socially inclusive, low emission, and climate resilient society. At today's event, we'll listen to these pioneers sharing the experience and lessons learned on addressed ecosystem restoration through Green Deal. Our event today aims to serve as a platform to share knowledge on ecosystem restoration as a key component of Green Deal among country representatives, policymakers, practitioners, and experts. We'll also touch upon the interlinkages between ecosystem protection and revival, climate change, and other SDGs. Today's event will help countries to build capacities and designing and implement national sustainable development policies and recovery plans for accelerating ecosystem restoration and climate actions and achieving the SDGs. Ladies and gentlemen, this has never been a more urgent need to revive damaged ecosystems than now. The healthier our ecosystems are, the healthier the planet and its people. In order to accelerate global actions, the United Nations proclaimed the next 10 years from 2020 2021 through 2030, the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Ecosystem restoration can help to end poverty, combat climate change, and prevent mass extinction. And it will only be successful if everyone plays a part. My office, UNOSD, will also join international community on its global action to restore ecosystem and combat climate change. With the institutional mandate, we'll continue to be committed in supporting governments and stakeholders in finding and developing their transformative and sustainable pathways in achieving the SDGs. I sincerely hope that our side event today would remind everyone of the urgent call for actions to restore ecosystem and battle climate change and help us to re-envision our paths towards the sustainable development. Thank you.
The opening. Now please join me in welcoming Professor Yoon Soon-jin, Chair of the Commission on 2050 Carbon Neutrality of Korea, for the welcoming remarks.
Respected Mr. Cheon-kyu Park, Head of Office, United Nations Office for Sustainable Development, Dr. Jong-soo Yoon, Chair of IUCN Korea, Mr. Tim Christopherson, Head of Nature for Climate Branch UNEP, Mr. Mohamed Irfan Tariq, Director General of the Ministry of Climate Change Pakistan, Ms. Bernadette Fischler-Hooper, Head of the International Advocacy World Wildlife Fund UK. It is great honor and pleasure to meet all the experts who are here today. I am Soon-jin Yoon, co-chairperson of the 2050 Carbon Neutrality Commission of the Republic of Korea. I'm greatly honored to deliver a congratulatory speech at the Green Deals to accelerate ecosystem restoration, climate action, and sustainable development goals implementation hosted by the UNOSD today. It would be no exaggeration to state that the 2020s in which we live now might be the last opportunity to overcome this climate crisis. Since industrialization, remarkable economic growth, and technological progress have granted material abundance and convenience to the mankind, but at the expense of it, environmental destruction, global warming, severe climate crisis have occurred. Global warming caused by accumulated greenhouse gas emissions has resulted in rising global surface temperatures, and its impact on ecosystems has resonated across humans, animals, and plants beyond countries and regions, along with ecosystems change, facing more frequent unpredictable risks. Now it is time for us to heed to the warnings of nature and to gather wisdom and seek action measures for sustainable coexistence within the ecosystem encompassing humanity, nature, and animals, all the species. The Allocate government fully recognizes that overcoming the climate crisis would make a great contribution to the future of mankind, future generations, and other species beyond the country. Therefore, last October of the year 2020, the 2050 carbon neutralization was declared as a national goal and confirmed at the end of the year 2020. In October this year, about a year later, the 2050 carbon neutrality scenarios and the 2030 enhanced NDC were determined as ways to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. The Allocate government will continue its utmost efforts to achieve the carbon neutrality by 2050 and has set the 2030 NDC as 40% emission reduction compared to the level of 2018. In the 2050 carbon neutral scenarios, not only greenhouse gas emission mitigation is included, but also we will pool the whole country's entire will and capacity to enhance the natural ecosystem's ability to absorb greenhouse gas emissions as a major means. Reportedly, the ROK observed 45 million tons of carbon dioxide in 2018 through forest. We will continuously endeavor to enhance the absorption capacity of forest in the future, expand absorption sources such as oceans, rivers, and dams. Carbon neutrality of 2050 involves participation of entire society, including the government, businesses, and civil society. Conservation and restoration of the natural ecosystem are vital to carbon neutrality. Today's meeting is a great opportunity to think about coexistence of humans, nature, and other species for sustainable development of mankind on this planet. We hope that experts' rich experiences and various opinions on conservation and the restoration of the natural ecosystem, response to climate change, and the sustainable development are shared by all global community members. Once again, congratulations on hosting green deals to accelerate ecosystem restoration, climate action, and sustainable development goals implementation today, and wish you a meaningful time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Yoon, for your remarks highlighting the urgency to address the global warming and its associated impacts on the ecosystem, and also Korean government's efforts to lead by example. Now, our next speaker is Mr. Tim Christopherson, the head of Nature for Climate Branch of UN Environment Program, joining us online to present us the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Tim, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I would like to introduce you to the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And since we have a number of Korean colleagues in this event, let's remember that the Republic of Korea had almost no forests left in the 1950s and a GDP about the same as Madagascar. Today it's one of the highest GDPs in the world, and it has more than 60% forest cover. So restoration of forests and of other ecosystems and economic growth is not a either or. Restoration has indeed to be part of any green recovery and any future economy that we design. Let me just share a few slides on the UN Decade to introduce you to the current status. So the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration was announced by the General Assembly, and the General Assembly asked UNEP and FAO to lead the decade, but we now have over 80 partners from across the world, from big organizations like the World Bank, the World Health Organization, UNESCO, IUCN, all the way to local implementers and private sector, small and medium enterprises who make a living of restoration. So this is a fast-growing partnership. We launched in June this year in over 100 countries, and the hashtag for the decade is Generation Restoration. So everybody alive today is Generation Restoration, because we only have 10 years to prevent, halt, and reverse the degradation of ecosystems worldwide. There's a flagship report online, Becoming Generation Restoration, that has all the facts and figures that you need to know why this is important and why we only can achieve the Sustainable Development Goals with a massive investment in restoration and a reprogramming of our entire economies. Degradation across the world is rampant. I will only pick out one figure here because this cuts across all ecosystems, but if you consider that the world has lost 420 million hectares of forests just in the last 30 years. This is an area larger than India. This is the amount of natural forest that has been cut and replaced, mostly with agriculture, but often with degraded land. And we have to turn that tide. So for the UN decade, the vision is that we have a new relationship between humans and nature. So the next chapter in the human story has to be a different one. And the vision also says we have the area of healthy ecosystems increasing, and that ecosystem loss, fragmentation, and degradation has been ended by 2030. There's three pathways how we will do this. The first one builds the global movement, and we've designed the decade in something called the New Power Principle. This is a book I can highly recommend here. It's called New Power by Jeremy Hymans, basically saying how decision-making works now in the digital age. But we've designed the entire decade with the principle that everybody can participate. On the basis of that global movement, we will push political will, and we're already starting to see that that will to address nature and climate together with other SDGs is growing, but we need more leaders as champions for generation restoration. The third pathway is technical capacity, and here we are glad to partner with FAO, but also with many other organizations, including UNDP, the Society for Ecological Restoration. There are many, many partners, and for example, over 300 people working in our monitoring task force to build a framework for ecosystem restoration monitoring. If we do this well, the benefits are of course going well beyond nature or biodiversity and well beyond the climate as well. We could also, by 2050, have a $10 trillion more healthy economy than if we don't do this. So this is in relation to the $1 trillion that we estimate needs to be invested between now and 2030 in restoration. It's a small price to pay because the cost of inaction is rising daily and the benefits will far outweigh the costs. One particular aspect here is subsidies. Governments around the world still spend an enormous amount of money on the wrong things, mostly on fossil fuel subsidies, which range, depending on how it's calculated, between 480 billion and 5 trillion US dollars per year if you count all the external damage that these fossil fuels do and the costs of that. Agricultural subsidies are $540 billion per year, and 87% of those agricultural subsidies are harmful for biodiversity, climate, people's health, or markets, or all of the above. So that means $470 billion need to be reprogrammed into restoration. We're building on existing efforts because luckily a lot has been done already and we know how to do restoration well. For example, in Korea, but also in other large-scale restoration efforts that have turned entire countries around. There's been large-scale experience with ecosystem restoration that we can share. We have a partner framework that is online. This is the link on the website. I'm also happy to share the presentation afterwards, but all this information is also on the website decadeonrestoration.org. We have an advisory board that is representing various actors who have an interest in restoration but who are not normally in our environmental scene. So these are filmmakers, artists, indigenous peoples, business people from around the world who advise us on the UN decade. The communication strategy reflects the fact that everybody can come in and contribute, and this is also shown in the visual identity, which you can download for any non-commercial use for free on the UN Decade website, and you can even adapt the logo to your organization's visual identity or to your personal taste, and many people have already done that and share that on social media. Many resources and contacts on the website. decadeonrestoration.org, including an ecosystem restoration playbook to get you started on how you individually can play a role. So to sum up, we need conservation and restoration now. Restoration has to be added. Conservation of nature alone is no longer enough. Nature has to be a part of an all-out decarbonization effort of our economies. And nature-based solutions, if we do them well, have benefits beyond climate mitigation. Repurposing public subsidies has to play a major part, and even the new announcements we heard at COP about several billion now invested in restoration is fairly small compared to the amount of public subsidies that still go against restoration and are funding environmental degradation. So there has to be an effort to reprogram our economies away from spending money to degrade the environment and towards restoring it. And with that, we invite you to join Generation Restoration. If you tag your posts on social media, it will automatically appear on the UN Decades website on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. So please join Generation Restoration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim, for your wonderful keynote with the overview of the ecosystem restoration and its benefits linked to many other SDGs. And these kinds of synergies among the SDGs implementation are exactly what our office UNOSD aims to promote. So the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration is really a fantastic opportunity to build the momentum, calling for more action around the globe. Now I would like to turn to the experiences from the two pioneers of the Green Deals, the Republic of Korea and the European Union. Please note that the question and answer session for the presentations will be conducted later during the comprehensive discussion. Firstly, we will hear from Mr. Il Young-oh, IUCN Republic of Korea Senior Government Manager, who will present on Korea Green New Deal and ecosystem. Without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Il Young-oh.
Well, nice to meet you. I'm Il Young-oh. It's an honor to present here about case of Korean Green New Deal and its integration of ecosystem. I'd like to express my gratitude to UNOSD for hosting this event, to Korean government which runs Korea Pavilion, and to all the speakers and panel discussion participants. Let me introduce myself a little bit. Currently I work for IUCN, but until the first half of this year I was in charge of Korea's Green New Deal, carbon neutrality strategy, and NDC establishment. Based on my knowledge of this, I will make a presentation. Through COVID-19, countries are taking the lead in economic reconstruction. In this process, many leaders around the world continue to emphasize that the direction of investment for economic reconstruction should overcome environmental problems such as climate change and biodiversity, and achieve more sustainable and greener growth. This spirit was also confirmed at the P4G summit in Korea, G7 and G20, where world leaders gathered this year. In today's presentation, I'd like to explain how Korea's Green New Deal 2050 carbon neutrality strategy and the upgraded 2030 NDC have been created, and how ecosystem and biodiversity as well as climate change response are being considered. Next slide. Here is the list what the Korean government promoted to overcome COVID-19 and build back the economy better in chronological order. First, the Korean government announced Green New Deal and drew up the budget for 2021 on July 2020. And at the end of October 2020, carbon neutrality by 2050 was declared. At the end of December 2020, the Korean government announced basic plans for carbon neutrality, and on July 2021, Green New Deal version 2 was additionally announced. In addition, last month, President Moon Jae-in announced last Monday South Korea's new 2030 NDC goal, namely a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions compared to 2018. What we'll develop in the future is to further specify the 2050 carbon neutrality strategy and create a detailed implementation plan to implement the 2030 NDC, all of which will be made into legal plans. Next slide. The Korean version of the New Deal consists of 4 types: Green New Deal, Digital New Deal, Social Job Safety Net, and Local Government New Deal. And the Green New Deal is a key sector among them. The Green New Deal plans to invest $60 billion by 2025, accounting for about 40% of the total investment in the Korean version of the New Deal. Korea's Green New Deal is divided into 8 areas, including investment to reduce greenhouse gas in power, industry, transportation, and buildings, and carbon sink, green production process, ecosystem restoration, water infrastructure inspection, green finance, and green R&D. As you can see in this slide, ecosystem, which is today's main topic, is an important element. However, overall, investment to reduce greenhouse gas is the main trend, and it is true that access to the ecosystem is relatively insufficient. Next slide. The Korea Green New Deal directly contribute to 8 of the Sustainable Development Goals and indirectly contribute to 5 goals. That is, it is closely connected to Sustainable Development Goals for energy, cities, industrial and infrastructure, production and consumption, climate change, ecosystem, and water. Indicator 14 and 15 related to the ecosystem are also included. Next slide. The Green New Deal and carbon neutral strategies set climate change response as the top priority, but we would like to examine how the ecosystem is considered and how nature-based solutions, which have recently become more important, are being used. In a large framework, in addition to investing the government's finance, institutional improvement are included at the same time. First, I'd like to explain the ecosystem and natural-based solution cases in the field of financial investment. There are programs to restore damaged wetlands, green areas, and biological habitats, remove alien species, and restore aquatic ecosystem. Also, we expand forests around the cities and schools and install a biotop on the roof of public facilities. As for ocean part, it includes restoration of the tidal flat ecosystem and marine waste disposal project. In particular, it includes expanding investment in forest and blue carbon to reduce greenhouse gases by expanding natural absorption source. The budget for each project is to be executed through local government and is designed with the effect of job creation in mind. In particular, Green New Deal version 2 set as the highest goal to achieve 2050 carbon neutrality was prepared in the direction of expanding investment in carbon absorption source. For example, the expansion include increasing investment in improving forest carbon sink capacity, changing either site in cities and industrial complexes to various vegetation zones, increasing investment in sea forest and scientific evaluation of carbon sink source, and big data R&D investment in forestry resources. Next slide. Second, while promoting the Green New Deal and carbon neutrality, national strategies and institutional improvement are being established at the same time. At the end of August, the Korean National Assembly enacted the Framework Act on Carbon Neutralization and Green Growth, which mandated the state to expand carbon sink and required consideration of biodiversity and balance in the process. Also, Climate Change Fund has been newly established. The Climate Change Fund 2022 budget will include a nature-based implication action. Not only that, so throughout this year and next year, Korean government will establish nature-based strategy for climate mitigation and adaptation, and 2030 national biodiversity strategies. In addition, the Ministry of Environment of Korea is creating a Korean green taxonomy that presents the direction of green finance and investment by financial institutions. It benchmarks EU cases to suit the case of Korea. This content includes biodiversity and ecosystem protection project as a target for green financial investment, and will also include do no significant harm principle that does not harm other environmental purpose. Next slide. It is noteworthy that a strategy to reduce greenhouse gases and adapt to climate change using a natural base is established. This strategy plays an important role in determining the relationship between climate change and ecosystem at the national level. The strategy is designed to comprehensively include carbon absorption, protection areas, ecosystem restoration, reinforcement of society resiliency using the ecosystem, and governance and business. These institutional mechanisms and national strategies will provide important directions for government, businesses, and communities in Korea to consider the ecosystem together while responding to climate change and further affect the expansion of financial investment in ecosystem sector. So far, as described above, we analyzed how climate change, ecosystem, and natural protection are linked in the process of forming a series of policies such as the Green New Deal, carbon neutrality, and 2030 NDC. Next slide. Now, I'd like to propose a lesson based on the analysis of Korea's Green New Deal, climate change response, and ecosystem management strategies. First, while conducting the Green New Deal, Korea approached to achieve results in terms of national strategy and institution, as well as expanding fiscal investment in the Green New Deal. In the green field, this approach enables factors of Green New Deal to play a role in promoting mainstreaming in both the economy and society. Moreover, it has the effect of promoting a desirable relationship between responding to climate change and protecting the ecosystem while aiming for sustainable development. Second, since COVID-19, global efforts on how to lead the world to meet sustainable development have continued and well received. And considering the complexity of economy and society, the Green New Deal needs to be strongly promoted in one basket with more suitable and resilient factors such as climate change response, ecosystem protection, resource circulation, and water management. In this aspect, 17 Sustainable Development Goals play important role in suggestion or direction. Third, to expand and mainstream investment in ecosystem, it is necessary to strengthen access to nature-based solution or ecosystem-based solution. Nature-based solution refers to protecting and utilizing nature to solve various social problems and providing well-being to humans. Nature-based solutions present a direction on how to manage the ecosystem while solving social problems such as climate change and water and biodiversity issues. It is notable that the international understanding of this part has recently increased. It is included in the content of the political agreement, and financial investment is also increasing. This is the end of my presentation on Green New Deal in Korea. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oh. That was a very in-depth analysis on the Korea Green New Deal in terms of ecosystem restoration and nature-based solution. And it is really fantastic to hear that Korean government's efforts to recover from the pandemic, it's really focusing on the environmental sustainability. Now, our next presenter is connecting online, Ms. Karine Zonberger, Director General for Environment at the European Commission, and she will be sharing EU's Green New Deal. Karine, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, now we can hear you. Thank you.
Really sorry for that. Thank you very much for this opportunity to make an intervention during this event on the European Green Deal. The European Green Deal has been launched during last year, and it's our new roadmap, the European Union's new roadmap to sustainability. It's a new growth strategy to make sure that we no longer steal the future from our children, but that instead we are healing it for them. Next slide. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen, but can you please make it full screen? Make your
Yes.
slides full screen. Excellent, thank you.
Sorry again, technology. I'm so happy that technology allows me to participate, but still technology has its vices. The European Green Deal is based on the thorough understanding that biodiversity and ecosystem underpin sustainable development. Biodiversity and ecosystem are at the heart and source of our society and our economy. That means in reverse, that biodiversity loss is one of the key threats for humanity. And it's also considering that almost half of the global GDP is currently linked to nature, one way or the other. Science is clear that the emergencies are interdependent. Biodiversity loss, climate change, and the pandemics we are facing are interdependent, and that means in order to address them, we need to tackle them in an integrated manner. They cannot be tackled in isolation, and therefore restoring biodiversity and ecosystems must be in the core part of our recovery from COVID-19, must be at the core part, at the heart of our policy and activities. Now, we have chosen to back this on the so-called wedding cake, a graphics to present the Sustainable Development Goals. And as you can see here, the biosphere, the water, the ocean, the terrestrial sphere, the air and the water is the basis on which society and economy build. When ecosystems are healthy, rivers are clean, then society and economies can thrive. And if they suffer, we suffer too. And if we have tried to bake a wedding cake without a thorough basis, you cannot have a wedding cake. Hence, protection and restoring of ecosystems must be core and center of our policies and actions. The European Green Deal and its related initiative covering many, many different sectors and policy areas, promoting clean energy, investing in smarter, more sustainable transport, eliminating pollution, ensuring a just transition for all, leaving no one behind, financing green projects, making homes energy efficient, leading the green change globally. There are the biodiversity strategies and the farm to fork strategies, the climate law and the climate pact in order to get all our citizens on board. Now all these flower leaves, it's just like a flower, it's one flower, so we need to work together in an integrated manner and protecting, as I said before, protecting and restoring nature and ecosystems is at heart and center of all this. Now, challenges here is, of course, to overcome also the institutional inertias when people are really used to work in their specific sectors. The working together for the European Green Deal implies that we work together in synergy and collaboration. Now let me zoom in on one of the leaves on the EU's biodiversity strategy for 2030, bringing nature back into our lives. Why do I zoom in into this strategy? As I've explained, that the restoration, protection of our nature, of our ecosystems is at the root bottom in order for a healthy society and a thriving economy. One can kind of summarize our EU's biodiversity strategy under 4 main elements: protect nature, protect what we still have; restore nature. In order to mobilize this further, we will soon launch a nature restoration law. We want to enable transformative change. We want to enable transformative change notably also through the implementation, accelerating mobilization, implementation of nature-based solutions that deliver multi-benefits in these different sectors. And above all, the EU stands ready to work together with all countries for an ambitious global agenda, both on climate objectives and on biodiversity objectives, notably aiming for aligned, high and aligned ambition for biodiversity and climate change. We know we need to work together in an integrated manner. That means that we also need to implement the do no harm principle that is common in this European Green Deal. And in order to implement these nature-based solutions, we have to make sure that standards and principles are respected. And we have adopted those standards and principles also in the frame of the Convention for Biological Diversity, where we adopted a guidance for ecosystem-based approaches with principles and standards. And hence, there we have to make sure that these principles and safeguards, social safeguards and social safeguards and environmental principles are duly respected. I thank you for your attention, and I would encourage you to look for further information under these links here provided. There's really a thriving experience growing through the implementation of these strategies and activities under the European Green Deal. Science has been very clear. Each half degree, each year, each choice matter. So let's get to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Karine, for your presentation on the European Green Deal as a new roadmap to sustainability for the future generation, and also the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. I really think EU is really leading in this field. Our next speaker is Dr. Sarwa Choudhury, Head of Inclusive Green Economy and Policy, UNDP Papua New Guinea. Because of the inconvenient time difference, she kindly sent us the pre-recorded video.
Ladies and gentlemen, first,
Sorry about the delay.
my thanks to the organizers at UNOST and UNDESA for inviting me today. I lead UNDP Papua New Guinea's Inclusive Green Economy and Policy work. The Korea Pavilion at the Climate COP is one of my favorite places to be, and it's a pleasure to join you virtually. Whether you are joining from Glasgow, Port Moresby, Seoul, or Dhaka, the combined health, economic, and social impact of the COVID crisis has affected us all. It has widened inequalities and exacerbated the dual climate and nature emergency. However, this crisis offers an opportunity for a smart recovery with a wide-reaching, fundamental restructuring of critical sectors. It makes economic sense to build forward better and to plan green recovery packages and for this transition to be socially inclusive, low emission, and climate resilient. Behind me, you can see an image from the West Uri Island in Papua New Guinea. While this picture may look peaceful and serene, the Pacific Islanders are living with the climate and nature crisis now. As the residents of these vulnerable islands tell us, with erosion and sea level rise, the available land in the islands off the coastline is getting smaller. More erratic weather patterns, rising sea levels, and changes in ocean temperature threaten the island's people. These changes risk food and water security as rainfall becomes less predictable, food harder to grow, and fish less abundant. Growing population pressure worsens these problems. In fact, the residents of the Cataract Islands in the autonomous region of Bougainville are among the world's first climate refugees. Since 2009, people started to relocate to tin huts on the main island of Bougainville. As they strive to find land to settle down in their new location, they leave their home behind, where their kin live and where their ancestors are buried, and where their culture remains. With new generations, they risk losing a bit of their identity, heritage, and language just to survive. This is a reality of climate change in the Pacific now, not in the distant future. In fact, by you, me, go, we, where do we go is a common saying among the islander communities there. Sadly, while the crisis is happening now, we are not moving in the right direction on action. UNDP research shows the world spends a shocking $423 billion per year in fossil fuel subsidies. A 2020 report by the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, found of all energy subsidies, around 70% went to fossil fuels, only 20% went to renewable power generation. For a just transition to green jobs, we urgently need to reverse that proportion. Fossil fuel subsidies are no longer acceptable. Renewable energy employs more people per unit of investment and energy than fossil fuels. And IRENA estimates it could employ more than 40 million people by 2050 if the international community utilizes its full renewable energy potential. From developing country perspective, we have two major challenges here. First, we need to decarbonize energy production, but we must ensure energy access to those who still lack it. There is no possibility to prioritize one over the other. Both are equally urgent and important. We must invest in expanding support to countries through increased capacities and expertise across the energy value chain, focus on off-grid access and transition issues, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, South and Southeast Asia. That's why the recovery must be green. Since we have speakers from the EU, let me just highlight that the European Green Deal is already having a catalytic effect. We have seen high emitters such as China and India, but also countries based on oil economies committing to a net zero. The Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain have recently committed to carbon neutrality by 2050. South Korea's New Deal plans to invest about $144 billion in creating 1.9 million jobs by 2025. And it also plans to phase out or convert all coal plants to liquefied natural gas by 2050. We have experts on the Korean New Deal here, so let me move on to UNDP's work on this front. UNDP's green recovery approach in developing countries has three key synergies with the EU Green Deal: low carbon energy transition, climate and nature positive policies and investments, and ensuring no one is left behind. We are supporting countries in green recovery while meeting the needs of climate change mitigation, adaptation, sustainable energy access, and biodiversity protection. Last month, we saw the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD COP15, take place in China, and the Kunming Declaration, where parties committed to negotiate an effective post-2020 global biodiversity framework. To go back to my point on green jobs, Ecosystem restoration in the US provides direct employment for 126,000 workers and generates 9.5 billion US dollars in economic output per year. Nature-related jobs are therefore an important potential source of employment in green recovery. Currently, UNDP's GEF Finance portfolio covers over 300 country-level ecosystems and biodiversity projects in 130 countries with a value of $5 billion in grants and $6.9 billion in co-financing. Beyond GEF, we focus our work on systemic changes. For example, together with UNEP, we co-host the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure launched this June. This will enable financial institutions measure the nature-related risks of their investments, their business dependency, and impact on nature. We work on strengthening national nature-based safety net approaches that protect rights of people vulnerable to biodiversity loss and reduce risk of emerging zoonotic diseases like the COVID-19. For example, in Mexico, Egypt, and Bhutan, we work to transform the tourism sector to be greener and more sustainable. Our recently approved strategic plan 2022-25 highlights our ambition to advance an inclusive green recovery with 6 nature climate positive actions. These are invest in green jobs and livelihoods, support policies that do not bail out polluting industries unless they transition to green, and fossil fuel subsidies, repurpose agricultural subsidies, integrate nature climate concerns into all finance and policy decisions, facilitate public-private partnerships, and leave no one behind, including a focus on women and indigenous peoples and local communities. As I noted before about Papua New Guinea, the indigenous people's identities, cultures, spirituality, and lifeways are very closely related to biodiversity protection. To respond to country-specific challenges and opportunities in advancing an inclusive green recovery, we will also continue to support on global and national policy framework and strategies such as the UNFCCC COP processes, Convention of Biological Diversity, and others, the Climate Promise, which supports over 100 countries to advance net zero and climate resilience pathways, the Clean Energy Compact, providing reliable, affordable access to clean energy to 500 million people, the Nature Pledge, supporting 100 plus countries to integrate nature into fiscal sector and land use plans to improve management of over 500 million hectares, including protected areas. Also, in the small island developing state context, SEEDS context, the ocean economy is valued at around $1.5 trillion per year, but faced with acidification, plastic pollution, coral reef destruction, and we are working on sustainable blue economy transition matters. So I tried to give a quick snapshot of our green recovery work in developing countries, but let me highlight that the EU is leading by example in Green Deal matters, and it is necessary to ensure its implementation both within the EU and beyond. Developing countries are taking steps in their own context, but with the CBDR, common but differentiated responsibilities principle in mind, the key move must come from G20 countries to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Basically, we have 8 years to make a reduction of additional 28 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. That's cutting the current greenhouse gas emission to almost half. The G20 account for 80% of the GDP and over 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Given the breadth of their impact, the actions that G20 governments take will be critical to our planet's future. UNDP and the University of Oxford recently released the G20 People's Climate Vote. This poll of nearly 700,000 people in 18 of the 20 G20 countries show that 65% of adults and 70% of youth believe climate change is a global emergency. There is clear, broad public support for G20 leaders to step up on their action and ambition. So the urgency is now, and climate and nature positive action needs to take place now. This cannot wait. So I'll end my presentation, thanking my colleagues at the UNDP's Nature, Climate and Energy team and colleagues from the UNDP Brussels Liaison Office who have provided inputs to my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sarwa, for bringing in the developing country perspective, including the small island developing states such as Papua New Guinea. Climate crisis is indeed affecting the most vulnerable people in the world, and the need for the urgent action can never be overemphasized. Now, I would like to introduce to you our esteemed experts sitting with me here in Korea Pavilion. I know the wait has been long. Dr. Jong Soo-yoon, Chair of IUCN in Korea, and Ms. Bernadette Fischler-Hooper, the Head of International Advocacy at the World Wildlife Fund, UK. Thank you so much for attending in person here with us today to share your thoughts with us on today's presentations and interventions. So Dr. Yoon, we will hear from you first. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jung. First of all, I thank you, Head of UNOSTA, Mr. Park, for giving me the opportunity to attend as a panelist today. And thank you all the presenters for your excellent and very informative presentation. Well, as far as I know, Thomas Friedman first mentioned the term Green New Deal in his New York Times column in 2007. At the time, he pointed out three elements. First is carbon pricing. Carbon pricing to the fossil fuels. Second was the change of energy system, transformation of energy. And then third one is undertaking massive investment projects for escalating the scaling up the environmental technology, because it is the New Deal. And it was followed by the UN next year. United Nations Environment Program proposed the Global Green New Deal. Global Green New Deal. And then after that, many political leaders started to use that terminology in their own perspective, political perspective. And then many countries have adopted the Green New Deal, including members of EU and South Korea. They are the leading countries in this arena. However, when it comes to the biodiversity or ecosystem, we need some points to be considered. When UNEP proposed the global Green New Deal, it had 3 points again. One is economic recovery, second is the eradication of poverty, and the third was the reduced carbon emission and then ecosystem degradation. So we have to note the ecosystem issue was included in global Green New Deal, but we don't pay attention that much to this issue. So I would like to talk about that third element today. To begin with, I'd like to elaborate one point, planetary boundary crisis. As you are well aware, Stockholm Resilience Center scientists, they proposed 9 elements which threatens the sustainability of the planet. Out of 9, 3 elements already transgressed this green zone, which is safety zone. The 3 elements are climate change and the nitrogen cycle. You might not be familiar with nitrogen cycle. That is, for example, eutrophication is caused by excessive overuse of fertilizer. And third one is biodiversity. Out of 3, again, the biodiversity issue was referred to at most severe degradation. So we have to stay within the safe zone in order to continue to survive. Crossing the line will cause the tremendous environmental catastrophe. Also, the French President Macron, he noted at the IUCN World Conservation Congress held in Marseille, France, last September. He said the biodiversity agenda is 10 years behind climate change agenda. So as for the climate change agenda, it has more robust global governance and a much clearer visibility. So it will take 10 years for biodiversity agenda to catch up with the climate change agenda. So during that time, we don't know how much the biodiversity loss and ecosystem destruction will go on. And then in addition, we have to recognize that climate change and biodiversity emergency are not two separate agendas. They are mutually supportive and closely interlinked, interconnected. Therefore, we have to strengthen the linkage and synergy among international processes to address two issues. Next one is Green New Deal, carbon neutrality and nature-based solution. Already previous speakers touched on these issues. More than 130 countries have committed carbon neutrality at the moment. And the Green New Deal is the key strategy to achieve the carbon neutrality goal. In this respect, South Korea and the EU willingly incorporate many biodiversity and ecosystem conservation projects in their Green New Deal projects. It's good. However, Green New Deal primarily focus on, greenhouse gas emission through the, for example, energy conversion, and relatively restoration of ecosystem, frankly speaking, to be honest, is very secondary. So as a result, nature-based solution created by IUCN can contribute to successful implementation of the Green New Deal. It says nature-based solution can address climate change mitigation and adaptation while supporting biodiversity conservation, health, poverty eradication, and other societal objectives of the Sustainable Development Goals. Also, a recent study published in Nature magazine in 2021 shows that nature-based solution can play a very important, powerful role in reducing temperature, global temperature, in the long term. The NBS has based on longevity. It cannot achieve overnight, as you know well. And it is estimated the nature-based solution can save 10 gigatons CO2 tons per year. So which is the more significant amount of CO2 emission from the entire global transportation sector. It's amazing. Yeah? So as a council of IUCN, I strongly encourage our parties to enhance further, ambition of their NDCs and then national adaptation plans, and then NEDS, under the Paris Agreement, including by incorporating NBS in their plans. Also, a joint IUCN and Oxford University study suggests that although 66% of Paris Agreement signatories included nature-based solutions in their NDCs, however, they lack effectiveness, and then in terms of substance, it's not enough. Lastly, I'd like to touch on this Korean case of carbon sink. South Korea announced the final carbon neutrality scenario only several days ago, as the chairperson mentioned. It seems rather challenging to achieve 40% 40+%, yeah, actually, reduction target by 2030, and thereby achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. All of the emitted greenhouse gases will be offset, yeah, by carbon sink and CCS in 2050. According to the announcement by Ms. Yoon Sun-jin, in 2050, 80 million CO2 tons will be released, emitted in Korea. And then 1/3, 25 million tons, will be covered by the sink, and then 55 million tons will be covered by CCS. When we see in 2050, the biodiversity ecosystem's role covers 1/3. It's very, very important. So that's why I say that conserving biodiversity and ecosystem will play a vital role in achieving carbon neutrality. So my conclusion is that first, climate change and biodiversity are closely interconnected. Second, must be equally treated, yeah, in the Green New Deal project. And third, nature-based solution will be a key project to achieving the carbon neutrality. Thank you for your attention today.
Thank you, Dr. Yoon, pointing at less attention the agenda of biodiversity and ecosystem has been receiving, and the urgency and ambition needed to address this agenda. Now, last but not least, of course, I would like to invite Bernadette from WWF UK for an intervention.
Thank you very much. 안녕하세요. Thank you so much to UNOST to invite me here to the Korean Pavilion. So I have an opportunity to show the one word that I can say in Korean. It is a great honor, and thanks for inviting me to reflect on the presentations so far. As you know, WWF is well known for ecosystem restoration, and we are here at COP. I would think it maybe comes natural to us that we focus on nature and its role in addressing climate change, and particularly on the role that nature plays in keeping 1.5 degrees within reach. One of the big focuses that the negotiations here will focus on during COP26, because the science is clear. We will not be able to achieve a world with only 1.5 degrees global warming without relying on nature and nature-based solutions. So Karine earlier talked about a wedding cake when she was presenting the foundation for the EU's Green New Deal. And that reminded me of my wedding when my Korean friend gave me 2 ducks that were linked together as a symbol for staying together for life, for forever. And I would think that the relationship between climate and nature is a similar one. They are together forever because they cannot be apart. And this is also, I think, one of the unique qualities, what makes the Green New Deals fundamentally exciting, being the one from Korea or the one from the European Union, that they take an integrated approach to nature and climate and sustainable development. This integrated approach is really important because, like Mr. Park said, climate change knows no borders. Sorry, climate change knows no borders, and that applies to national borders, but just as well also to the borders of the areas that we talk about. So you cannot see climate, nature, sustainable development in silos. They are always interlinked. There are no silos in life. Life does not happen in silos, and neither does the way climate change and nature degradation, unsustainable development are evolving. So we at WWF have looked at this, we call it the triple challenge, to see how you can break down these silos and how you can find an integrated solution to this integrated problem. We did a study to see if it is actually possible in theory, under current circumstances, to find enough land to serve the needs of ecosystem restoration, climate change mitigation and adaptation, as well as food security, the sustainable development aspect. And you might not be surprised to hear that the answer is no. There's actually not enough land available. So that is why we call it the triple challenge. And like I said, the problem, the challenge is interlinked. So there are not only those three challenges, there are also feedback loops that reinforce these challenges constantly. These feedback loops can be negative feedback loops or positive feedback loops. So what we are now facing is the challenge to turn these vicious cycles into virtuous cycles. So it is not only the problem that is interlinked in three ways, also the solutions are interlinked in three ways. And this is the way we need to approach this. And we need to do so very urgently. Like Professor Yun said earlier, this decade is the last opportunity to overcome the climate crisis. Or like Tim said, we are the generation restoration now. So urgency is absolute priority. We need to take action. Because what our study showed as well is that it's not only possible under the current business as usual, but if we fundamentally change the way we go about producing and consuming our food, for example, then it is possible to address these challenges, turn this vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle. Lastly, I wanted to say a few words about what this means in practice for here at COP, for the negotiations that I have now started after the world leaders left and will continue for the next week. I think there are some key outcomes that, well, we've seen on Tuesday at the Leaders Summit for Forest and Land Use quite a lot of remarkable announcements, including the Leaders' Declaration that said that they want to reverse deforestation and land degradation by 2030. This is remarkable. This is one of those steps that we need. This is one of those integrated solutions to the integrated problem. Now, here at COP, obviously the core business, if you want to see it for COP, is the negotiations. So the one thing that we're still missing in this picture really is to see nature and its role in the addressing of climate change, both mitigation and adaptation, and its essential role in keeping 1.5 alive, formally recognized in the decisions. There is the cover decision where we can, for example, give this formal recognition. There's also the opportunity that when NDCs are being implemented, so the national climate plans are implemented, to particularly look at how nature is being used. We have just tomorrow, I'm giving you a sneak preview, because tomorrow morning we're going to launch this report. It's called NDCs, A Force for Nature, which looks at all the NDCs and how nature is being implemented, and whether the original version and the enhanced versions that have been submitted, whether there is a trend. And I'm telling you a secret. The result will show that there was indeed a positive trend, a greater uptake, and also more, for example, quantified targets included in NDCs, in the enhanced NDCs. But of course, there's huge room for improvement as well. So that's the second thing. The first thing is landing in the decisions. Second is to look at NDCs. And the third thing I wanted to mention is many people, especially in the climate context, when they think nature or nature-based solutions, they think trees. There's so much more than trees out there. There's wetlands, there's grasslands, and there's the oceans. So the third thing that we really need to see here at the COP is a dedicated process, especially under the UNFCCC, for the oceans and our marine ecosystems. And then I think we can say, okay, we did our first step for all these urgent actions that are needed to address this triple challenge, and we can go from there. Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernadette. I cannot agree more that climate change and ecosystem is linked like a duck couple. I really love that analogy. And also thank you for the sneak peek at the upcoming WWF reports on NDCs. So that brings us to the end of the first round of presentation and interventions. Let us now proceed with the Q&A. So I would like to open the floor to the audience here at the Korea Pavilion. If you have any questions to the speakers, please raise your hand.
Thank you very much. I'm Christine Kaya. I am a member of parliament from Uganda. And as parliament, we have line committees. We have one concerned with the natural resources management and also one concerned with climate change management. And I saw that one of your challenges is identifying politicians in ensuring that biodiversity is well managed. And I am here to pledge that, yes, politicians are coming up, but we have a serious challenge, the challenge of the growing population and the need to preserve biodiversity. Because as populations grow, as if politicians find it very difficult to secure spaces for their growing populations. And even the need to balance climate change management and income generation. When you tell somebody to preserve something, he will ask you to feed him or her in order to preserve. So the issue of balancing, especially provision of funds to those who have decided to preserve biodiversity, is so important, especially in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you for the excellent question on how to balance the growing population and the need to preserve biodiversity. So if we have more questions from the audience, then we'll hear the question first and then give the speakers the opportunities to respond. Is there anybody else who wants to ask questions? If not, I would like to ask any of the speakers to respond. If you want to answer this question, please let me know. Karine or Tim, if you would like to respond, you can just unmute yourself and speak.
May I?
Yeah, sure. Dr. Yoon.
Yeah, actually, I don't think she asked. Already she mentioned her perspective. Actually, regarding the increase of population, it's different depending on the country. In Korea, the problem is decrease of population. However, globally, as you said, the increase of population is a big challenge. Actually, I think that is the very root problem in climate change issues, biodiversity issues. We are saying we linkage between the two. However, there is root causes the population increase or economic development. We have to economically continue to develop in order to get more well-being. So we have to tackle the underground, the root causes. That's why we are saying the SDGs. All the SDGs goals are interconnected: poverty issues, income issues, economy issues. So when we talk about climate change issues, that's why we have to see that those all relevant goals. So specifically, I think that you said regarding the politician. So I say we have to secure the horizontal coherence among the ministries, among the politicians, because they are quite divided in their political perspective. So most of all, I think the head of state has to have the interest in these issues. Otherwise, there is no solution. That is my response. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yoon. And I'll give the floor to Bernadette.
Okay. I just wanted to add a couple of more sentences to Dr. Yoon's great response. Like he mentioned, it is actually the biggest footprint is by people who live in Western economies where the population are actually sometimes shrinking. So I don't think the biggest challenge is to think about the population growth in countries like Uganda, but rather to make sure that countries with sometimes shrinking populations reduce their footprint dramatically. And I think that the big opportunity here is to leapfrog the development, not just how it happened previously with mobile phones or with green energy supply, but also now with sustainable lifestyles. And to then for countries like Austria, where I'm from, for example, to humbly follow the example of southern countries to show the way how we can lead a sustainable lifestyle going forward.
Bernadette, thank you. So now we only have 5 minutes left, so I think I would like to ask each of the speakers for a really brief final comments before we close on any of the topics we addressed or we didn't address today. And you may also want to respond to other speakers' interventions as well. So I think we'll go in the order of the first round of presentations, starting from Mr. Christopherson, followed by Mr. Oh.
I think what we have to understand is that we cannot just tinker on the edges of our current economic system. We have to completely rebuild our economies. This is not a question of adding $1 billion or two more to conservation or restoration of nature. We have to completely reprogram our entire economy and shift our paradigm to what it means to be a human being on Earth and what we value. So this shift is much more fundamental than anything that we're discussing at the moment. But I hope we'll get there in the next 10 years.
From IUCN's perspective, recently IUCN raised some kind of initiative. It is called nature-based recovery. Though it has two elements, two principles. The first one is that 10% of subsidy for reconstruction of our economy should be directed to nature issues. The second one is that 90% of the money fund should not do significant harm to the nature. I think these two kind of political initiatives should be raised internationally, and we need to focus more this kind of initiative to find a balance between climate change and nature issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Karine, would you like to make an intervention?
Yes, thank you. I would like to add on this request on a deep systemic change, fast and deep transformative change. As Tim Christopherson has said, this is not about tiny little changes. This is really deep transformative change, and we need to do it, to undertake it fast. And actually the European Green Deal tries to mobilize for exactly that. And it's also for this reason that the European Union, together with up until now over 90 heads of state, and South Korea equally, have joined the Leaders' Pledge for Nature, which is this holistic roadmap to emerge from this planetary emergency we are in. I am optimistic that together in collaboration, using our knowledge at best, we can achieve this, but we must be realistic that what is necessary is not an incremental change, but it's a deep transformative change, but it will help us to prosper in the future. So it's about a development, about a regenerative development, a development that gives back to nature. We have used nature for too long as just as if it were infinite. And somebody mentioned the planetary boundaries. We have transgressed them, now we have to rebalance. We have to rebalance our economic development in order to make sure that we have good livelihoods for all. And in solidarity, in collaboration, I think we can achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Karine. Dr. Yoon, did you?
Okay. I'd like to, we have talked about climate change and biodiversity issues. Those two are very complex, actually. We said those two are very supportive. However, sometimes when it is implemented on the ground, there might be a conflict. So how to resolve the conflict between the two? There is no magical solution, I think. However, in order to resolve those things, I think, for example, IPBES scientists and IPCC scientists met together to discuss those issues last June. So, yeah, in order to find solutions, we have to get together and in order to minimize the side effect and maximize the expected outcomes. So. Nowadays, the world we live in is very complex. So only one Einstein cannot resolve it. We need Einstein, we need Newton, we need Elon Musk. So only one genius cannot resolve the world, save the world. So we have to approach in a very integrated manner. That's the only solution. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to keep it very short. I think this is all about integration. It's the word that you will hear me say the most. It's an integrated problem that needs an integrated solution. I think also very important, integrated governments. So the interesting thing about Green New Deals, as they're being set up now more and more, is that this is really a one government approach that is required to implement it. So it's an integration on very many levels. And I think that is, so it's all about integration. At the very end, I would like to invite you all to join me here at COP to make sure that nature becomes a climate hero. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are perfectly on time. As we bring this event to a close, on behalf of UNOSD, I would like to extend our sincere gratitude to our distinguished guests, speakers, and participants for your support and active participation. I hope that everyone enjoyed and learned something from our event. We move forward with a deeper conviction to accelerate ecosystem restoration, climate action, and SDGs implementation. Once again, thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Actually, I have several.
Hold on. I'm losing my...
Yeah, this is one.